Hello everyone and welcome back to the PM Computing channel. Today I was going to do an AI tutorial and show you how to script out a group of enemies, and once they're aware of the player they would call for reinforcements and we would have a Jeep drive up from a distant position, and once the Jeep was in range the guys inside the Jeep would jump out and start attacking you, and the gunner in the Jeep would stay in the gun position and start shooting you from there as well. It kind of occurred to me that because we're pretty early on in the process of doing these tutorials, I should probably go back to the basics for those of you who never used this before. What I'm going to do today is just basically go through the process of showing you how to create a new level from scratch, and we'll go ahead and import terrain layers from an existing Crysis map, so I'll show you how to do that, and that'll speed things along and we can get into the process of adding vegetation and get all that going. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. What I'm going to do first here is I'm going to load up a map from Crysis and we're going to export as terrain layers. So let's go through here and find a good one. If you remember the levels that you played in Crysis, you have kind of an idea of what those environments look like. Each one of those had a slightly different lighting setup, and for our purposes here, I really like the harbor levels. I think I'm going to use that one. So I'm going to go to harbor, harbor.cry, and open that map. Now once it loads, loading, we're going to take a look at the lighting for this level. These bigger maps do take a while to load. Okay, and here we are. Now, you'll notice that the time of day is right before dawn. Basically, the time of days for these levels have basically morning through nighttime, so the whole day process, morning to night, is actually covered inside of the time of day files. So when you export the time of day file from a level, you're exporting all the different times of day, and you can place that into your map, which is a pretty awesome feature. So what we're going to do is click on terrain, and we're going to go to time of day. Now if you look here, so you see where the sun is. If we can adjust this, we can pull this up, and here comes the sun up. We can go up to noon, so it's high noon, the sun's right overhead, and we can advance all the way over to the evening time, and we can go to full on night if we want to. And there's the moon. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is export this. And we're going to export it to, let's just say we've got a new folder, we'll call it TODs for time of days. And we're going to call it harbor.tod. So we've just successfully exported all the lighting from this level into a file. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go new. Let's call this level, we'll call it light test. Oops, if I can spell today. Now the high map resolution basically determines how intricately detailed the texture is that's laid down on the terrain, and then the terrain size you can see here. Now if you hit meters per unit, you can increase this and make it just absolutely massive. We don't really need anything that big for this purpose, so we're going to leave it like this for now. And it's going to basically create a new template for us here. So you see it pulled over the time of day. What we're going to do is, next thing up here, we're going to go to terrain and edit terrain. Now you can see we've just got a water mass here. We have no land yet, so what we need to do is go up to tools and generate terrain. Now these values here give you different features in your landmass that you're creating. If you go too extreme on these, you'll have some really weird land formations when you're done. So what I recommend is basically keeping a default and then kind of working with it a little bit after that, so until you kind of get what you want. So we're going to click OK for now so you can see what's going on. And we've got a big landmass here. We're going to click OK, and we've got this. Now, you can see this is a very mountainous terrain, and there's not a lot of play area here. There's a lot of rough land with a little bit of a valley here and there. That's not real useful for play purposes. So what we're going to do is we're going to change some values in the terrain tool. So let's go back to terrain, edit terrain. This time we're going to go generate terrain, and we're going to bring the feature size down a bit. That should reduce the number of huge peaks like we've got here. Let's see what happens now. Maybe a little too much. Okay, so we've got a lot of little islands here. Now what we're going to need to do, it looks like we're going to have to bring that water level up. So we go back to edit terrain. We're going to modify and set the water level. So we're going to bring that up a bit. So let's bring it up probably about, well, yeah, about twice what it is now. We'll leave it about there. That's fine. Now we're going to go to generate terrain again to leave everything at default, and we got a new level. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, I'm still not really liking this, so we're going to do it again. A lot of this is just trial and error, unfortunately. Excuse me. Okay, that's not going to work. Let's see what this gives us. We'll go and try that. So what we're going to do is come up here and we're going to generate surface texture. We'll leave everything at default. And that gives us a pretty decent area to work with here. I'm going to go ahead and change the time of day so you can get a better idea of what this looks like. And here we go. So you see it's not bad. So to get some more land area here, what we could do is bring that water level down a bit more. And see, that gives us a bit more land mass here. You're kind of getting the idea of how this works. And we'll go ahead and do the water level again. So you're seeing kind of how this works. See, like, it starts kind of on a big square and it just circles out from the middle. So what we can do is we can kind of leave it like this for now, and then this will be a good time to show you the modify tool. So we can come over here, this little green area up here, which is the terrain. Then we go to modify. Now we have some things we can do to the terrain. We've got flatten, smooth, and raise and lower. So one thing that we could do just to kind of show you here how this works. The outside radius is the radius of this circle. I don't know if you can see that, but this is a circle here. So we could see how it's cutting into the terrain. We don't really want that right now. What we can do is set the radius. Well, let me do that one more time just so you can see this. And you see it cut a big hole. It'll modify the terrain within this area. So what you can do is hit Control and click on an area that you want to keep that height. So if you hit Control click, when you hit the flatten tool, it'll keep everything that you're modifying at the same height of the area you picked. So we can do this. And if you like another height, you can say click this, and you see how that works. And then you can like pick something like this. So that's one way of doing it. And for our purposes here, that'll probably work out pretty well. Now, the next thing is to generate our surface texture. So we'll go up here. We haven't really generated a land texture for this yet, so we're going to do that now. So we're going to generate surface texture, basically leave it a default, and go. So that basically just assigned a big texture to the terrain. And here we have that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is pause this for a moment, and I'll be right back. Hello everyone, welcome back. Sorry, I had to take care of some things real quickly there. So the next step in this process is going to be, let's go ahead and get that lighting imported that we exported from the Crysis harbor level. So we're going to go to the time of day, and again, to get there, you go to terrain and time of day, which brings you to this window right here where we can adjust the lighting. We're going to go click on import from file, and if you remember, we set that in the TODs folder here, and there's the harbor.tod that we got before. So we're going to click OK. And now the lighting from the harbor level is actually here available for us to use. And you can see we got that really pretty dawn color that we had in the other one. And there we are. So the next thing that we're going to do is I'm actually going to go back to the harbor level again. I'm going to save our changes. Again, we named this map lighttest.cry, so I'm going to save it. Now I'm going to go back to the harbor level again to kind of show you how this all works. So we're going to go back to harbor, harbor.cry from the game levels. And what we're going to do now is we're actually going to export the terrain layers from the harbor level into our map. So basically we need to define textures that we can paint onto the surface of the terrain. When I say textures, actually I mean materials. If you're not familiar, basically a texture map is just a 2D image, and a material is several textures laid onto each other to create a bumpy, like it's a bump map and a specular map and a normal map and everything else all piled onto one another, which gives 3D objects surface details that aren't really there in the game. So the same thing works for the textures, works for vehicles, works for guys. Everything in the game has different types of materials applied on them. So what we're going to do now is export the terrain materials from this map, and we're going to put them into our new map. So we're going to go to terrain, and we're going to go to texture. Now you can see this big long list of stuff over here. Those are all the materials that are painted onto the terrain. One thing you could do to take a look at this is let's just take a quick look over here. I'm going to turn the widgets off. And you see how intricate and detailed this whole terrain looks because we got grass and trees and stuff everywhere. Let's turn the vegetation off, and that'll give you a better idea of what this looks like. So we're going to come over here and disable the vegetation. So now you can see how they painted the terrain in this level. So you can see all the different detail layers that they've got in here. So we're going to basically export all these so that we can use them in our map. Just turn vegetation back on, and you can see the huge difference there. So we're going to come over here, and what we're going to do is export the layers to a file. So we go to File, Export Layers. Let's go to Game, and we'll create a new folder here called Layers. Now we'll just call it Terrain Layers. Exported layers is fine. We don't really need to name it anything special at this point, and we're going to save it. Okay. Now we can go back to our level. Whoops. If I can remember which level I have here, light test, there it is. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go to terrain. We're going to go to texture, and we're going to import terrain layers. Go to terrain layers, export layers, and click OK. So now we have all those materials that we had from the other level available to us here. Now, what we do have to do is every material has a surface type associated with it. So basically, if you're in the game, the engine has to know what kind of surface is this? Is this a grassy surface, muddy surface, dusty surface, metal surface, etc. So they have this all kind of mapped out in terms that make sense. You just have to kind of go through here and match each one up. Now I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here, and then I'll set these all up and I'll show you how this works. Okay, so what I did basically was on each one of these, you click it, you have a list of surfaces, and basically, so plains, grass, green, you look in the surface types, and here's a plains, grass, green, you select that one. Now I just went through the list and did this for all the ones that have surfaces. So once you're done with all that, click OK. And now what you can do is go to the terrain modify and go to layer painter. And now you've got options. So what we can do is say we want to paint this cliff here. So we're going to, or I'm sorry, this mountain. We can go to our textures, and we can actually pick, let's see, we'll do cliff detail just to give you an idea of how this works. And now we can paint like real detail onto these. Some of these have more detail than others, obviously. And then we can come down here and say, let's make sand around the beaches. So we can do sand wet, closer to the water. Increase the brush radius a bit, and we can do like this. Oops, probably don't need that there. And then we can put dry sand past that. So we're going to pick this, probably, well, no, we'll leave it like that for now. Now we'll bring it down. Bring it down like that. When we generate our surface texture, it'll blend this in a little better than it is now. This is just to kind of give you an idea of what you can do, though. You can make it look a little organic just by kind of like doing intermittent clicks while you're moving it around. Once you do this a while, you'll get the idea. Then we can come over here and we can actually start doing a grassy texture. Let's do plains grass green. Well, no, plains grass dry. So then we'll come and start. Now, what I found is that doing this seems to work better. It gives it a more organic look. You could basically increase the brush size and just boom, do like this. It doesn't quite look as realistic. I mean, what you could do is do something like that, then go grass dry, bring this down, and paint just little bits here and there. I mean, there's multiple ways of doing this, but you get the idea. So what we can do is come up here, File, Generate Surface Texture. Let's go ahead and give it a higher detail, and we'll click OK. And what it does is it blends it. It's a little pixely from a distance, but when you're on the ground, you'll never notice it, especially when there's vegetation. So that's the next part we can do here. So the next thing we'll do is go to vegetation. Whoops. We'll add a vegetation object. We're going to go to natural. Let's see, let's do trees. And any breakable ones here. We'll start off with that one, then we'll add another one. I'm going to go ahead and add a few here just so you can see what's going on. Thinking what else we want to put in here. Let's see. So you see what I'm doing? I'm just picking different vegetation objects to use with the map here. And go ahead and add a couple. Just so the next ones we're going to do is grass. Okay, we'll add that one. And that one. We'll start with that for now. So normally you would organize these into different objects. We're not going to really do all that at the moment. This is just a quick tutorial. So what we can do at this point, actually we'll go and add the grass first. So we'll come to our grass. We're going to paint the objects. We're going to you can see how this works here. We're going to actually up the radius a bit. We can paint more at once that way. Now it's also interesting to note, so let's go back to vegetation for a second actually. So we are going to, on this grass, if you come down here to the settings for it, one of the really cool things is, if I can find it here, the slope max and slope min basically are the minimum and maximum elevation. So like if you're up on a cliff, once you get to a certain altitude and angle, it won't grow. So you can actually specify using that tool which vegetation can grow on large cliff faces and rocks and stuff, and which ones can't, which is useful for, you know, if you want like cliff bushes on a cliff, obviously a lot of vegetation can't grow there, so you could only set certain items to work that way. The next thing that we can do here is The view distance ratio by default is set to 1. We can crank that up to 255 at the most, and that basically means that you can see that grass from a much longer distance. So we're going to set that to, let's set it to 20. So now you can see it from quite a long ways. And now we'll go ahead and add some trees. Now obviously we don't add clusters of trees like this. It doesn't really look right when you're in game, so we're going to undo. We're going to bring this brush size down a lot, and we'll place one at a time. Now what you can do is just hold down the button and just sort of organically draw it across the landscape as such. And then we can go add another tree and just keep adding trees. So now you see we have a landscape that's populated with trees. So basically in your level, every level is a little different. You'll just have to kind of common sense figure out, you know, where is it best to have a bunch of vegetation and where not. But this has just been a really brief overview on how to make a level. In the next video, we'll get more back into the AI stuff, and we'll go over some more advanced things. So really appreciate watching the video. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.